Good morning. So we're going to finish topic 10. Not a lot left on topic 10. We're talking about sports and exercise and things like that. And topic 11 today is on chronic disease. So we'll get to that in a minute. So one more reminder, the last assignment is due 1 week from today. So just be on the ball on that. That is coming up if you haven't started working on it already. All right, so we left off somewhere around here. We were just talking about diets for athletes. I think one of the last things we're talking about was carbohydrate loading. And I had gotten to this part here. And of course, depending on what you're doing, marathon versus sprinting versus those kind of things may depend on the balance of this kind of thing. And it's kind of interesting. I was talking about Michael Phelps. We'll get to him in a minute in terms of some of the things they were trying to do around particularly the Beijing Olympics, where his goal, of which he was able to achieve, was 8 gold medals. That's an extreme amount of sports, never mind on a high level, to do all in a short amount of time. It was really quite remarkable. And you can imagine the team of people they had working with him, not just for the training, but the diet and all those kind of things. And it's really, really fascinating. But usually you see a lot of these diets sort of put that 60% carbohydrate around there. It's kind of an easy number to remember, about 2/3. Again, if you're trying to go for more endurance, trying to increase that a little bit more, and so on, those kind of things. Usually that's the ballpark number you see in a lot of the schemes. The textbook has some recommendations about people trying to increase their, if they're trying to increase your calories because you're performing or working out, and recommendations around things that you can do to increase the calories and do them in a healthy way to provide you with nutrients. Remember, some of the things that we want, of course, are iron. That's a big one. It's going to help us with our blood and those kind of things. So there's lots of suggestions there. I'm not going to go through them all, but you can take a look and you can see they're starting off with a relatively healthy breakfast, and then they're throwing on a few more things, right? Some extra toast, which of course is carbohydrates. You can see they're focusing on the whole grain toast and those kind of things, and so on and so on. I feel like there's something else I was going to say about this, but you can compare these. I'm not going to go into all the details on this. What was I going to say about this? Yeah, so and other examples here of pre-game meals. So again, I think we were talking about last day. It kind of depends on how soon before the game or the event you're talking about. If it's right before, high glycemic stuff is actually not a bad thing. There's all these protein bars and things like that, you know what, they're easily digestible. They're going to give you the nutrients. They're probably expensive. You can probably find other things out there. So, a bagel is always a really good one. Digests well, pretty high amount of calories in a bagel, mostly complex carbohydrates. If you want a little protein, you put something like some cream cheese or some peanut butter on it. That's one of my favorites anyway. Anyway, the Michael Phelps diet. There's a bunch of articles on the internet about it. You can check it out. There's a lot of them claiming he was eating 12,000 a day, but I actually read some interviews with him and he said, no, that's a myth. It was more like 8,000 to 10,000. I'm like, it's still pretty massive, right? So somebody here, I found this blog where somebody kind of assembled all the food he said he was eating in one day and put it all together, right? And there's tons of interesting quotes from him at the time, basically where, he was swimming hours and hours a day, right? And you can look up the stats, but roughly about 80 kilometers a week, right? Most of us don't even jog 80 kilometers a week, never mind swim that much. And he basically said at the time, he spent about 2 years sleeping, eating, and swimming. That was pretty much all he did. And you can imagine, but it's really interesting, a person like this, these elite athletes, to see the amount of, like this guy was singularly focused, right? It was just amazing to hear his dedication to doing this kind of thing. I can't remember how many days he said he went with training straight, right? It was like 590 days without missing a single training practice. Can you imagine? But then again, look what his goals were, right? Very, very lofty, and was able to accomplish it. I'm not going to say too much more about Michael Phelps, but like I said, really fascinating scenario. Obviously, we don't recommend this kind of thing a day, but you can see we're looking at a lot of carbohydrates, a lot of protein, and kind of a variety of other things, right? He said one of the things he was eating a lot of was pasta just to get the calories up and to get those carbohydrates in. But he was trying to cram in, I can't remember what he was saying for breakfast. It was like, 5 to 8 eggs or something like that. Sometimes hard boiled, sometimes omelets. I'm just like, I can't even picture eating this much food, right? Maybe when I was 16, I don't know. He just felt like he could eat everything. The last part is kind of on supplements, right? So I'm not going to go into all the supplements here. Some of the things we've talked about a little bit. You have a chance with the assignment to delve a little deeper into particular supplements. There's a lot that I don't know a ton about. I remember years ago taking a metabolism course, part of my undergrad, and we talked a lot about supplements. And it's the kind of thing where like there are so many more options now. It's like mind-blowing. You go into one of these supplement stores, and I mean, it's kind of hard to keep track of all these products. But I want to touch on a few, right? We talked about amino acid supplements. It's better to get complete protein than amino acid supplements. Amino acid supplements, they're not necessarily shown to be effective. And some of the concerns are about the whole balance, right? When you digest complete protein, your body has a chance to basically digest things slowly at a decent rate. You take the supplements, and sometimes what happens is these amino acids will bind receptors that are meant for other amino acids and can actually cause sort of a funny imbalance and those kind of things. So there's a lot of indications that these may not necessarily be the safest thing. I know there's a lot of people doing weights and they're into the branched amino acids, and I don't really know a lot about that, whether there's some good studies on that or not. Caffeine is a good one here. And actually, I copied this from the textbook here. It says, no research has yet shown exactly how caffeine benefits performance. Caffeine can and certainly does benefit performance. You probably know caffeine is a stimulant, makes you a little bit more alert, and can actually help a little bit with endurance. There's a lot of athletes that it's pretty much standard, large cup of coffee before their event. I was talking to one of the Husky soccer players, and I can't remember what I was asking him about, and he was just saying, yeah, before a game, large cup of coffee and 2 Advil. That was his prescription for himself, right? He had some achy knees, so he wanted to deal with them, and he did find that the coffee, particularly, he said after about giving him endurance after maybe about half an hour of kind of running around, he felt that really gave him a little bit of an edge. But lots of athletes do that kind of thing. There is a maximum dose for sports for caffeine in terms of, if you're an Olympic athlete or a college athlete, there is a maximum dose of caffeine that you're allowed to have. And some people do abuse it. It was famous, I think in the 1970s, 80s with baseball players taking excessive caffeine and those kind of things. But exactly, what is going on? Apparently in terms of the endurance thing, we don't really fully understand. It is a stimulant. It makes you more alert and awake. And in some ways, as probably most of us know, caffeine is really a wonderful drug. When I drive on the highway, I get sleepy, right? So what's the solution? A little bit of caffeine, and it's amazing, right? To have that benefit, and really for the most part, caffeine side effects are minimal. Some people I know they get withdrawal headaches and things like that, but it's not like it's really, really bad. But anyway, like I said, kind of a wonderful drug in some ways. There's a whole bunch here. We talked about, I can't remember if we talked about carnitine or not. That's another one that people seem to be taking. I can't really comment on it too much, which is unfortunate because I remember doing an essay on it years ago and I don't remember anything about it. Yeah, there's lots of these here that are kind of worth looking into, if you're interested in enhancing performance and things like that. And there's a massive table in the textbook that goes through, I think there's like 25 in there and talks about them. We talked about creatine, which is, again, 70% of studies show it might help with weightlifting and those kind of things. A lot of these, there's a lot of question marks, right? And really, for the most part, most of us, even elite athletes, are going to benefit from just having good diet overall. Whether they give you that edge, that 1% edge or something like that, that's the kind of thing most of us are probably not too concerned with. We talked about protein powders. can be a good source of protein. I know some people don't digest them as well as others and whatnot, but they certainly are decent substitutes for actual meats, and they are meant to be digested easily. And a lot of these protein shakes, you know, they all have other little things in there. They might have the creatine in there, and sometimes they have some, you know, sugar, right, to help you have that energy for the weightlifting and all those kind of things. And whatever's going on with the protein powder industry, it's working because they're selling lots of it. I'm just seeing it everywhere. I go to the gym. There's all sorts of guys you see there. They've got some sort of cloudy water bottle with probably something like that in there. What else was I going to say? Last thing I want to talk a little bit about was anabolic steroids. Not recommended. There's lots of documentaries on this. There's a good one on Netflix. Oh, what's it called? I think it's called Icarus. And it's this guy, he's a cyclist, and I can't even remember his motivation and all that, but he's you know, doing this competitive cycling, and not like at a world level, but just kind of at a semi-competitive level. And you know, he starts hearing about people getting into this, and he starts taking some, and it's amazing the performance difference he was getting from taking these illegal steroids. But anyway, interesting documentary because it goes into this, it's like this crazy spiral of events where the guy who's helping them is a Russian doctor, and it turns out, if I remember correctly, he was involved with some of the doping of the athletes in, you know, for the Russia Olympics, and all these kind of things, and all this crazy stuff happens. But if you're interested in that kind of thing, check it out. There's the list of a bunch of the supplements and whatnot. Like I said, I'm not going to go through all of them. We could probably spend, you know, a couple of weeks on these kind of things and talk about what's going on with the physiology and those kind of things. As for steroids, like I said, there's risks with these kind of things. There's risks with anything that you're taking that's not necessarily natural, right? Anabolic steroids typically are some sort of testosterone or something similar to testosterone. So they're going to amplify the effects of that. Now, the effects the athlete wants is obviously the muscle building part of testosterone. And this is why some people naturally can build muscles a lot easier than others, because they naturally have more testosterone. But you put extra into your body and you're going to get some of the other effects of testosterone. One of the big ones is extra aggression. And sometimes that's physical and behavioral aggression. And there's a lot of good studies that show those kind of things. A lot of good studies that show that steroid abuse is most predominant in college and university football, apparently by far. And I can testify that. I've known a lot of athletes in university, and I knew one guy who was a swimmer, and he was a nationally ranked swimmer. And I was asking him about the drug testing and all that, and he was saying, so there was, I think, 48 people on the swim team. 2 people on the entire swim team were tested multiple times. They were nationally ranked athletes. And he said the stats are about 80% of all the testing is the football play team. So there must be some abuse there. And again, for obvious reasons, you build bulk and muscle, it's going to give you that competitive advantage. But there's lots of risks, depending on your man or woman. You know, messing around with things like getting excess body hair, the aggressiveness I mentioned. It can affect sexual development if people are taking it at a young age, before or kind of around puberty. That can really mess people up in terms of growth and sexual development and those kind of things. And it's something that's kind of, I mean, I don't know anyone who's taken them illegally personally. I've known people who've had steroids for recovery from surgery. And so, you know, they only had them for a few weeks, and then they were working out and and gaining muscle a little bit more than usual. So that's the only thing I know about them. What else was going to say about steroids? There are supplements out there that you can find that claim to have the steroids in them and all that. And again, something I don't know a ton about. There's a little blurb on them in the textbook. Not going to go into those in any detail. Anyway, that is it for topic 10. I told you we're almost done. So I'm going to, I have this up. I don't think I have it activated. I just have to press my button a little, and this will be due next week. Okay. All right. So let me switch over here. I'll talk about disease today. Okay. Oops, what did I just do? Okay, so that should be up. So we're going to talk about disease. This is one of these topics that I had a hard time holding back on in terms of wanting to expand the topic quite significantly. For example, we're going to talk about cancer. One of my other classes, we talk about cancer for like a week and a half. It's the kind of thing I'd love to go into in tons of detail, but we're really going to just focus, kind of razor focus a little bit on the nutrition part and a few other things around that. There's a lot that could be said about diet, health, and disease, and there's a lot that we've said already. We've talked about things like nutrient deficiencies in other units. For example, if you're deficient in iron, it can lead to anemia and so on. So a lot of those things that we're not necessarily going to focus on. We talked a little bit about diabetes already. We're not going to focus so much on diabetes here in this unit, but a few things that were kind of missed or things that we've sort of talked about around the fringes, and we kind of just want to get into a bit more detail on. So you can see here, kind of the three or four big ones I have on here are the immune system, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, and cancer. So we'll talk about these here a little bit in turn. And actually, the first place to start is to talk a little bit about malnutrition. So as I mentioned, we talked about nutrient deficiencies. I'm not going to kind of get into and delve on those things a lot more here. It is something that is seen in Canada. Again, there's certain risk groups that are a little bit higher than others. Obviously, people who are homeless are likely to have malnourishment. Sometimes people with certain disorders, such as HIV, and particularly when it's migrating more towards being clinical AIDS, these people can have certain deficiencies and be at more risk of infectious disease. And sometimes this leads to kind of a vicious cycle, right? In terms of, and you can see that little chart there, there's a little spiral thing in the textbook talking about, when you're malnourished, your immune system goes down, which leads you to be susceptible to infectious disease, which often leads people to not eat properly. And it's kind of this cycle of all of those kind of things happening, and it can get worse and worse. Like I said, there's lots of little groups that can fall into that malnourishment kind of category. There's certain Indigenous communities in Canada as well that for various reasons have been known to have high rates of nutrient deficiencies. That's not something I'm going to get into in a lot of detail there. But you can see there's this chart here talking about, I guess what I said right already is that when you have impaired immunity, it leads to all sorts of other things. I thought I had another slide here on the immune system. Let me just take a peek here. Maybe I don't. Maybe I have that in the notes. One of the things to know is when you're malnourished, for some reason, I don't really know why this is, but the immune system is kind of one of the first targets, right? When you're deficient in protein and iron, for example, the immune cells are some of the first things to be broken down. Maybe because they're in the blood and it's handy for the body to do so. I don't really know what the mechanism is. But of course, that's bad, right? Becoming malnourished and those kind of things. Iron is a big one. I think we talked about vitamin A and vitamin D as also having roles contributing to the immune system, but iron is probably the biggest one deficiency that can lead to impaired immune system. But basically, malnourishment overall is bad for the immune system. What is this one here? Okay, we talked about certain groups. Young people, old people, those people are also susceptible to malnourishment. This was actually a really interesting article talking about malnutrition, the immune system, and also the sociological aspects of that in terms of how malnourishment and weakened immune system can lead to poverty and those kind of things. And if you get into third world countries, developing countries, children that are malnourished tend to have lower IQs, which gives them less opportunities later in life as well. And all of those kind of things sort of fit into this picture. This is another study I was looking at, and it shows this interesting chart talking about basically major causes of death in children, and that striped section in the middle is kind of trying to show which how much of each of these things have contribution to malnutrition, right? So you can see, for example, diarrhea, it's saying 73%. Can't really say I know how that works. When I think about diarrhea, I think about certain infectious organisms and as being more of the cause, but probably you become more susceptible to colonization by these infectious organisms if you're malnourished and so on. Okay, what else is it going to talk about? Yeah, okay, this is just, I guess, the list. I already mentioned iron, vitamin A, vitamin D. We talked a little bit about vitamin E and K, vitamin E being an antioxidant, which usually is scooping up things like free radicals and vitamin E deficiency can lead to certain types of cancers and so on. But all of these things are part of your health. And like I said, when your health is going down, the immune system, for some reason, is one of the first things to, unfortunately, take the hit. Oh, interesting also, right? Notice I mentioned iron deficiency is bad for the immune system. Iron toxicity is bad for the immune system too. Yeah, so anyway, iron toxicity, not a good thing either. You can see this is a chart from the textbook that talks about some of the things that happens to your body when you're malnourished that lead to immune deficiencies, right? So skin getting thinner. Your skin is the first barrier against infection, right? And when your skin is brittle or weak or whatnot, you're looking at getting more tears. There's other epitheliums in your body that cover your respiratory tracts, your genital tracts, your digestive tracts, and those kind of things. And when the connective tissue there starts to get a little bit more brittle, it's more susceptible to invasion by infectious organisms and so on. But anyway, I'm not going to get into all that without doing an entire unit on the immune system. Unfortunately, don't have time for everything. One of the other disorders we talked about in our protein unit was protein deficiency. And there were a couple of diseases we talked about that sort of fall under this category of protein energy malnutrition. And some of the symptoms we talked about before are things like wasting and edema and those kind of things. And you can see immunodeficiency is on that list, right? And again, for obvious reasons, your immune system uses a lot of proteins and resources that, in this case, the body is basically trying to use to just survive. And so it's a bit of a trade-off. Okay, so we're going to switch and talk more about chronic disease, which in Canada is more of a big deal. I showed you this slide here, I think way back in the first lecture, somewhere around there, about leading causes of death in Canada. And the #1 killer, which I think is the #1 killer worldwide as well, is cancer. And so we'll talk about cancer here in a bit. And so that's a big one to think about. And many types of cancers are nutritional or lifestyle, I'm not going to say based, but there are risk factors around lifestyle and nutrition. I know a lot of people think about carcinogens and toxic chemicals and things like that, which can be part of your lifestyle. For example, the #1 thing that anybody can do to cut their cancer risk is to not consume tobacco products. And probably most people know that one. But there's a lot of diet that can affect your cancer risks in many areas. And so we'll get to that eventually. You can see heart disease or different types of cardiovascular disease is #2. So those things are very highly lifestyle and diet-based diseases. You can see there's a couple other things on there. Diabetes, we talked about already. These are 2019 numbers. Of course, 2020 and 2021, COVID-19 has kind of got in the slot there. So maybe about #3, which is kind of interesting. We don't usually see a change in this list, right? I've been teaching about diseases for a long, long time. And in my lifetime, very few things have changed on these kind of lists. So when we're talking about degenerative diseases or chronic diseases, we really mean things that you're not necessarily getting a quick onset. They're usually something that the onset is kind of slow, and usually there's some cumulative effect of exposure to something, or maybe eating the wrong thing, or having a condition that leads eventually to that disease, such as high blood pressure or excessive body weight, or having cholesterol levels that are undesirable for a long time that leads to damage in the tissues. And so there's a whole bunch there. Like I said, I'm not going to talk about all of these things, but one thing to say about chronic diseases is most of them do not have one cause, right? It's not like if you just cut out all the cholesterol in your diet, you're going to get rid of all your cardiovascular disease. All of these things have multiple causes that include genetic factors, social factors, environmental factors, diet factors, and other kind of exposure factors, right? And they're very, very complex. I'll show you this this little chart from the textbook that's trying to show you, what's going on with all of these diseases. For example, if you look at cancer, it shows that there's several different types of diet risks, several types of other risks, including genetics and age and those kind of things. Some risks are things that we can do something about, and some are not. Usually we can't do anything about our age, for example. We can't change that. So kind of just really two notes about this chart here. I was looking at it and trying to think about what is there to say about it. One is that one risk factor, so let's say high blood pressure, can be linked to multiple diseases. And most diseases are also linked to multiple risk factors. So that's something to know about it. So if you have one risk factor, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get that disease, but it might be something to do something about, of course. So let's talk about cardiovascular disease. When we talk about cardiovascular disease, there's kind of a big group of diseases around that, right? So we're talking about what's going on in your circulatory system, and that of course includes your heart and anything connected to it, which is pretty much your whole body. The two big ones that people think about the most are heart attacks and stroke. So a heart attack is basically usually you get some sort of blood clot in an artery, and that artery is feeding part of your heart muscle. And so the artery gets blocked, and literally part of that heart muscle actually dies. And if it causes the heart to stop beating, that could lead to death, right? So that's a heart attack. A stroke is basically that kind of thing happening in your brain. You've got a clogged artery in your brain somewhere, and a piece of brain tissue is not getting fed any nourishment, and that can lead to a range of symptoms as well, from slurred speech to death, and all sorts of other symptoms. But there's also some other things, right? People talk about aneurysms and what else is on there? Pericarditis, which is inflammation of the heart muscle, and all those things are kind of related to heart disease, right? And the big root of most of these things is atherosclerosis. So I think we talked a little bit about atherosclerosis when we were talking about cholesterol. I think I've got some pictures here. So what does that mean? It means you've got a buildup of plaque in an artery, and the plaque is usually loaded with the LDL cholesterol, and it causes that artery to be not just constricted, but also hardened as well. So it's not soft and pliable and flexible anymore, but now it's inflexible, and often it means it's constricted, meaning less flow can get through. So one of the things that, just going back to that blood clot thing, is, by the way, your blood, we get microclots in our blood all the time. And your body is pretty good at, for the most part, particularly when you're young, getting rid of them relatively quickly. And if you have flexible arteries and things like that, then these blood clots, they're not going to cause too many problems, because your body eventually dissolves them to get rid of them. But if you have constricted arteries or hardened arteries, there's more likely of a chance that they're going to get stuck somewhere and cause you some sort of issue, right? And hopefully not a heart attack or a stroke, but very, very common, of course. And I think most of us probably know at least somebody who's had a heart attack or stroke. So it does affect all of us, whether directly or not. So how does this happen? This is one of these things where I think we have a decent idea, but I don't think it's something we can say this is exactly what happens, but we're pretty sure it has a lot to do with damage that happens in the arteries due to inflammation. How does that inflammation happen? Probably a variety of causes. One of the obvious ones is toxins, and one of the biggest things that most people can do to reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease is not smoke tobacco. So that's kind of a theme that comes up with health again and again and again for many different diseases. And so tobacco smoke contains, I don't know, like 5,000 chemicals or something like that, right? Of which I think last time I read, at least 70 of them are carcinogens, which goes to the cancer thing. But we've got other chemicals that are doing other things, right? So you inhale the smoke, it goes into your lungs and directly into your circulatory system, into the arteries, and those toxins can cause damage to tissues, right? There's other ways we can get damage to our tissues. High blood pressure, right? When you have blood flowing through faster, there's more likely that damage is going to happen. You can see some other things on the list here. I think there's infections, elevated homocysteine. I don't know if we talked about that one already. Homocysteine is something that people get sometimes in their blood when they are low in folate. I don't know how that works. I just know when you're deficient in folate, you end up with more homocysteine, and I don't know whether that's a byproduct of some sort of metabolism or not. I just know it's an indicator of folate deficiency in people, right? And it must be slightly toxic, I guess. I don't really know a lot about that one. And the other link is the LDL cholesterol, and very good at building up and grabbing onto things. So this inflammation, by the way, is a good thing to happen for many parts of your body, right? When you inflammation happens all the time, you get scratched or you get an insect bite, and your body, says, hey, okay, we should just, check things out. And, it gets a little red and a little bit sore, but that's your body putting blood over there, and it's your body bringing in immune cells just in case, you have that scratch and you get some bacteria in there. Your body is trying to kind of deal with that. And it gets a little itchy sometimes. And for most cases of inflammation, it's kind of a quick kind of minor thing, maybe lasts a day or two. But prolonged inflammation is where it's a bad thing, right? And particularly when you get it in places like the arteries. And so, as I mentioned, what you're doing is you're recruiting white blood cells, and the white blood cells come in to repair things, but they do it relatively aggressively, right? We don't want any bacterial infections, for example, right? So they want to do it aggressively, and sometimes that can cause further damage. And when you have this damage, it's that cholesterol that kind of gets stuck in there, and I don't know the mechanism behind that, but somehow that LDL is the big culprit, right? It gets stuck in there. And so you get the plaques, and that's heart disease, right? So if you can reduce some of these things, you can reduce your risk for heart disease. So the LDL is a big one. Like I said, exposure to certain toxins like cigarette smoke is another one, and having nutrition and having other good health as well. Here's, I was showing you this here. This is kind of showing a different picture. This is from the textbook showing the heart and arteries, and you can compare the photograph of the healthy artery to the more clogged one. And anyway, I thought it was kind of an interesting picture on that one. So some stats here on heart disease in Canada. So it says here about 1 in 12, so that's 2.4 million Canadians live with some sort of diagnosed heart disease. So I didn't know that stat. I guess I figured it was pretty high. One of the things about heart disease a lot of people think about is it's sort of thought as a man's disease in some ways. And it's true, men actually have more heart attacks than women. But here's the stat that nobody seems to know, is that more women die of heart disease. And I think, I don't know a lot about that. I seem to remember reading an article about it a few years ago, seemed to talking about men are more likely to demand attention when they have the heart attack, whereas women are more likely to delay asking for help. And I don't know if there are studies behind that, and I don't really know all of the details of that particular thing. And who has more strokes and who has more heart attacks, I don't know what the answer about that.
I read somewhere that the way heart attacks sometimes present in women is different. Have you?
I do remember reading something about that, just not recently, so it's kind of somewhere in the back. I can't quite remember, but yeah, that's a good point.
Could that be like contributing factors?
It could be, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things that go on with bodies, and women tend to have a higher pain tolerance than men, which is again reasons why they're more likely to die of appendicitis, for example. I guess that's right, a thing, right? Man is in pain, help me now. a woman's like, no, it's fine, I'll just make dinner and then I'll rest, you know? I mean, there's stereotypes there, but you could imagine it for sure, right? Yeah. Although interestingly, I don't know a single woman who's ever had appendicitis, but I know they are less likely to go in right away for it. Yeah. Yeah, so it's always interesting to see these stats here. I think I see somebody has a question or comment in the chat. Let's see here. I don't know, but anyway, oh yeah, man flu. Yeah, okay, that's what he's saying. Yeah, so it is what it is, right? Death rate, you can see it's talking about in terms of 3 times higher with disease and age and those kind of things. And generally, just on a very general level, heart disease is correlated with age. So for men, it's about 45 and up. For women, it's about 55 and up. So women, the risk becomes higher after menopause. For men, I don't know what's about 45, but I'm in my 40s. There's a lot that I could say about other men, but let's just say a lot of them do start putting on weight in the 20s. And it probably accelerates in the 40s for some people, without saying any names. Okay, yeah, so this is just talking about men and women. And the good news is that the numbers are down actually in Canada and developed countries quite significantly in terms of the number of deaths from heart disease. I had a map here I want to show you in a minute. I was trying to read a little bit about it, but it's extremely complex when you look at the epidemiology of these things from country to country. You can imagine that it's hard to just classify, you know, what are the dietary habits of your average Canadian. Good luck with that, right? But you do see trends, right, in certain countries and whatnot. If you look at, for example, heart disease in the United States is significantly higher than Canada, as well are the obesity rates in the United States are higher than what you'd see in Canada, and so on, and those kind of things. Yeah, so here's a map. Think about it what you will. Quebec is grayed out. This is the weird thing about Canada and Stats Canada. I don't really know why this is, but you'll see all these charts that will have all the provinces and territories except for Quebec. I don't know whether Stats Canada has their own branch in Quebec, but I'd love to know more about Quebec because there are a lot of people living there, right? But Alberta, I guess, you know, is kind of in the middle there somewhere for heart disease rates. And like I said, read into it whatever you want. Again, you know, people always ask me what Alberta is like, and I'm like, well, I've only lived in Fort McMurray, and it's very different here than it is in Edmonton, and very different in rural Alberta than it is in Banff and Medicine Hat, and all places I've been. People seem very different. I think there's probably more Newfies in Fort McMurray, so that might have a cultural effect. But anyway, yeah. Like I said, read into it what you want. So you can see this is showing rates of cardiovascular disease worldwide. And again, the epidemiology of this is kind of interesting. You start to get into the details on these kind of things, right? So you can see the dark blue. So Africa a lot lower. And so the question is, you know, why is that? And the reason is that in many African countries, your life expectancy is actually lower because the amount of infectious diseases are much higher. People are dealing with all sorts of things from malaria to whatever. And so if you're not living to your 60s or 70s, you're less likely to have heart disease. Plus, people are probably not eating as much meat. They tend to be a little more fit. Those kind of things can change the risk factors. You can see Asia, on the other hand, in fact, Russia is a big one. So what's going on there? Tobacco use. Right? Like I said, the number one thing that anybody can do in their life for cardiovascular disease is cut out the tobacco use, right? And so you definitely see that kind of trend with cardiovascular disease and certain types of cancers when you put these maps together and so on. But like I said, the good news is the rates seem to be going down, and I don't know if we fully understand why that is, whether people are actually healthier or whether we're just better at detecting and preventing. It's probably a whole bunch of different factors, which is kind of interesting. I'm hoping to read more about this. Preventative factors, you can see, I like this little graphic. It's saying things you can do something about and things that you can't. You can't change your your gender or your age, and your hereditary lot in life. So here's the thing. If you have a family history of heart disease, you are more likely to have it, particularly if you have someone in your family who has had a stroke or a heart attack before age 50. That increases your risk quite dramatically. So it's something I think about a lot because my mother had a stroke when she was, I think, exactly 50. And so apparently that puts my risk a lot higher. Now, she had high blood pressure. I do not. Again, that's high blood pressure is something that is linked with genetics for some reason. I don't have it, so maybe I missed that part. I don't really know. But not at 50 yet. So we'll see. We'll see what my health looks like in the next few decades here. Ethnicity as well. Again, that's one of those things that's hard to tease out, whether it's a cultural thing or not. One of the things I've read in many, many places is that men of African descent, for some reason, there seems to be a higher rate of high blood pressure there, which of course is linked with heart disease. That's one of the ones that I've read repeatedly in many, many places. The left side, you can see things that we can do something about, right? We can do something about smoking. High blood pressure can be mediated by losing weight and exercising, eating certain foods. Potassium-rich foods tend to help with high blood pressure. We're actually going to talk about high blood pressure in a few minutes here. And diabetes is kind of I guess you could call it an independent factor. You may or may not have diabetes, and it may have something to do with the rest of the things, or it may not, kind of as an independent factor. Of course, the big one to think about is our lipids, okay, right? And so remember the LDL are the bad ones, the lousy ones. I try to think of L, lousy, thinking of a bad word for LDL. And they're clogging up the arteries. And so what do we do about that? Not necessarily to do with cholesterol and diet, more to do with those saturated fats and trans fats, which are kind of a thing of the past, hopefully. So remember what we were talking about with the fats. Diets and high saturated fats lead to high cholesterol levels in the blood, and generally the bad cholesterol, the LDL. If you have high HDL, that's good. The HDL, if you remember way back, we were talking about that, actually can scoop up cholesterols and take them out of your blood. So that's good. Whereas the LDLs are actually contributing them, and then they're getting clogged up in the arteries. The other thing we can do to with our cholesterol levels is fiber, right? Everything comes back to fiber. Fiber is very good at mopping up cholesterol, excess cholesterol in your intestine, and is definitely linked to having good cholesterol levels. So by the way, sometimes people get their cholesterol levels done. And I had a physical, I can't even remember when this was. I feel like it was in the last 2 or 3 years. And of course, you know, you get the sheet and there's numbers on it, and what do they mean? Kind of drives me nuts when you see these things that come from the doctor, because you know, a number is a number. It doesn't mean anything unless you have the context. So you can look these things up. You get different numbers if you are American or Canadian, right? You can see in Canada, we're using millimoles per liter. In the United States, they're using milligrams per something, deciliter, I guess. So again, it's just different units, different countries, and that's fine. We want to be unique as Canadians, so I'm fine with that. But these are the good numbers and the bad numbers. You can see usually they break it down with cholesterol is they'll give you your LDL numbers and your HDL numbers. Sometimes they break it down into other subclasses and whatnot, but you know, you can always look these up if you ever have your cholesterol done. It's worth a peek to see where your values are at. And the other one that they'll often show you is your triglyceride values as well. And you can see here's what they should look like in terms of high or low values. And if your cholesterol levels are in a risky zone and you're of a certain profile, there's a chance they might prescribe you some sort of drug that's going to deal with your cholesterol levels to try to minimize the risk of heart disease and stroke and heart attack and those kind of things. Okay, yeah, I guess we talked about a lot of these things already, so I'm not going to dwell on them a ton. Physical activity is good, and the reason for that is what you do with physical activity is you are training your entire cardiovascular system to be healthier, more flexible, more efficient. Your heart becomes more efficient, so it actually slows down, which decreases your blood pressure, which decreases your risk and all of those kind of things. Tons and tons of physiological changes can happen. High weight, high body weight is connected with high blood pressure. It's a strain on the heart and those kind of things, which is all a big risk factor for cardiovascular disease. Tobacco smoke, we've said that already. And then good diet, which things we've talked about already. I think I feel like I had another note about diet here. Let me just see if I had something else. I feel like there's definitely something else I wanted to say about this. Yeah, there's lots of other suggestions out there as well, right? One of the other things we were talking about was the omega fatty acids, right? So having those in your diet, if you look up heart healthy diet, there are a bazillion websites from like official sources and non-official sources, and they'll have all the same recommendations about reducing saturated fat, reducing sodium, right? So sodium, salt, increasing potassium. Potassium is found in fruits and vegetables, and talking about where you can get the good fats from. So things like peanuts and other nuts, and those, you know, is where you're going to get a lot of good omega fats and so on. But anyway, if you are in that kind of risk, it's worth it to look it up. And usually those diets are kind of the good ones. And usually it's all the same recommendations we've been talking about all semester. Yeah, so here's an example right here. Dug this off a website, and they had these 3 diets they were talking about as heart healthy diets, right? So the Mediterranean diet, we were talking about already. Remember, the Mediterranean diet reduces red meat and increases things like fish. So fish has the good omega fatty acids in there and so on. Vegetarian diet, obviously cutting out the meats entirely. So that's going to cut out some sodium, cut out saturated fats and those kind of things. And usually have a lot more fiber in it. And we also talked a little bit about the DASH diet. I know I have a slide coming up talking about the DASH diet here in a few minutes. So DASH, by the way, diet, what does it stand for? Diet is probably on there. Yeah, dietary approaches to stop hypertension, right? So you see that DASH diet listed all sorts of places, particular for people with high blood pressure issues as well, right? So notice that other comment is that diet is great, but it can't necessarily counteract the effects from other things, right? You can have a great diet, but if you are smoking cigarettes, the diet isn't going to, cancel out the cigarette smoke effects, right? And diets can't necessarily make up for lack of physical activity as well. So some things to think about there. Another thing that we were talking about a while ago, which is maybe a little bit more relevant to cancer, is the phytochemicals and the whole foods, so antioxidants and things like that in foods that can counteract things like free radicals, which can lead to cancers and whatnot. But there certainly are some phytochemicals that are kind of in this category of they might help the heart, of which I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but there are a few out there. Oh yeah, okay. There's the chart there, talking about some of the different things. So there's the omega fats, vitamin E. That's a good one. Those kind of things. So I'm not going to dwell on that. Alcoholism there, right? Alcohol can lead to high blood pressure in some cases, and those kind of things. And alcohol is one of those things that there seems to be a lot of people that are pushing, telling you must drink 1 glass of red wine every day for a healthy heart. And I have a hard time with those studies because not all the studies are saying that, and we don't really have a mechanism for understanding this. There's just a lot of diets that are recommending that kind of thing. And that kind of goes sometimes hand in hand with the Mediterranean diet, right? Where it's pretty common for people to have a glass of wine with dinner. And so there's a lot of questions about this, whether the red wine with the Mediterranean diet is helping the Mediterranean diet, or it's just everything else happens to be healthy, and the red wine is kind of just a random variable that really has nothing to do with the health. There's also risks with drinking too much alcohol. 1 glass a day and those kind of things. It's kind of a recommendation that maybe for some people it's helping and some people it's not. That's kind of my understanding of the research of the whole thing. So like I said, that's one of those areas where I have opinions about, and I kind of just think, I don't know, sounds kind of sketchy. Because if you're talking about the phytochemicals that you're going to find in red wine, you can get the same thing from just drinking grape juice and not have the alcohol content, which can, you know, if you drink too much, make you fat. But anyway, that's my opinion on that. I know the textbook talks about it a little bit, and I didn't like how they worded it. I'll just say that. We talked about saturated fat. There's some recommendations. You may notice I don't really like going into how many grams of something you should have. None of us go around and weigh our food, right? You know, yesterday, every meal, I never weighed how many grams of fat I had or anything like that. So if you like the numbers, that's great. Some people do weigh their food and they're keeping track of those kind of things. I tend to not dwell on the numbers. I can never remember them. But you can get the idea, right? You know, we want to increase unsaturated fats, decrease saturated fats. And I think a lot of us know what that means without remembering the exact numbers of grams of saturated fats to have or not have. Anyway, okay, let's talk about high blood pressure, which is totally related to cardiovascular disease as well. So what is blood pressure, right? So pressure is kind of like the amount of fluid that's going through your little arteries given amount of time, right? And it's kind of what pressure is. And we can measure it. You know, the doctor or nurse might put the little armbands around you, or if you went to, I actually went to Save-On and they had an automatic one. I stuck my arm in and it automatically grabbed my arm and did my blood pressure. It was kind of cool. But they get two numbers, right? And you think about your heart is pumping. And so there's a pumping part where it's pushing, and that's going to be a higher number. And then there's a relaxing part when the heart is opening up, I guess you could think about it. So this is systolic and diastolic, basically, right? And so they give you two numbers, and you know, they can look at them, and you know, they might give you a number. They might say, okay, your blood pressure is 130/80 or something like that. And again, this is something that doesn't really mean a lot unless you're thinking about blood pressure all the time. But it is a pretty good indicator and a very quick and cheap test at the doctor's office for them to take a look at your risk for cardiovascular disease, right? As they can check your blood pressure, and something that you can do something about by changing your diet and lifestyle or drugs, and you know, lots of options for cardiovascular disease. So if you get your blood pressure taken, you can see that you know, if you're less than 120 over less than 80, you're in the green zone, okay? And that's good. And that's where you want to be. Again, you know, these are just ballparks, but generally you want to stay away from the red zone, right? And you can see it's talking about, you know, this red zone there, and that's where they're, in many cases, they're going to start looking at getting you to maybe take drugs for high blood pressure or other modifications in your life. And generally, you know, there is a bit of a stereotype, right, around high blood pressure, people that are overweight and middle-aged and older. But I'll tell you, just say one thing about this is that it is also sometimes common for women who are pregnant during the pregnancy to have blood pressure issues as well. So just something to think about, something that obviously be monitored if and when you do get pregnant. It may be something you have to deal with. So this is just kind of showing, you know, what's affecting blood pressure, right? Your heart, if your heart is pumping hard, if your heart is not efficient because you're not exercising, it's going to have to work harder in order to do that. Another thing is the diameter of your capillaries and arteries. Again, that totally related to cardiovascular disease and all those kind of things, and volume in the system. And that's why obesity and being overweight is directly related to blood pressure, because you have more volume in the system. Your heart is working harder to try to get it through a larger system. And that's kind of what's going on there. Okay, yeah, here's the DASH diet. I can't remember if this is the exact picture I showed you before or not, but again, it's kind of just the usual recommendations, right? Adding a certain amount of fruits and vegetables to the diet. There's a few different DASH diets out there, by the way, that kind of have slightly different recommendations about how many servings to have. But you can see it's talking about whole grains, vegetables, fruits, low-fat foods such as dairy. Usually these DASH diets include, they're trying to get you to include some more nuts or legumes in your diet, partly because they have the good omega fats in there and whatnot. And you can see the big focus is on lean meat, low-fat things, and minimizing the amount of sweets, right? But again, I don't know what to say. It's the usual recommendations, right? Okay, so what about, yeah, I guess we kind of talked about most of these things already in some degree. You can see there's a note there about having good nutrition, right? So calcium, potassium, magnesium, vitamin C, those are all good things to have for trying to reduce your blood pressure. So potassium, as I mentioned, is found in a lot of fruits and vegetables. So if you are increasing your fruit and vegetable intake, you're probably going to be increasing your potassium intake, which will help with blood pressure and reducing the amount of sodium. You can see I found this little infographic that talks about sodium myths, and it's talking about things like high levels of sodium are found only in food, and it says that, well, actually you can find sodium in other things such as your medications as well, which of course, yeah, is something to think about if you're in that case. A lot of people are into sea salt and other alternate salts now, and the question is, are they any better or any worse? And I mean, there's so many different types out there, it's hard to keep track of. Sea salt is not pure sodium chloride, but it's mostly sodium chloride, right? So, and it does have some potassium in it, but if you're having high blood pressure, don't load on the sea salt either. You're not going to get a lot of potassium from loading on the sea salt. You're going to get mostly sodium again, which is what you're trying to avoid, and so on. But you can check these out, right? And talks about the amount of salt in these products. And, if that's something you're becoming aware of, my mother, when she had her stroke, this was something she was becoming aware of, and was buying all the no salt products and lower salt soy sauce and all those kind of things. And when I was younger, of course, a lot of growing kids crave salt. So it's kind of annoying to see my mom buying low salt products at the time. But anyway, you can just add it on if you want, I suppose, right? Okay, how are we doing for time here? All right, we're doing all right. We'll talk about cancer. I'm not sure if we're going to get through all of cancer. There's a lot to say about cancer and a lot that could be said about cancer. First thing to be said is that almost half of us will have it in our lifetime, 43%. I know it says 2 in 5. I guess they're rounding, right? So we all know that you are either going to get it or you're going to know somebody who has it. It's going to affect all of us. The other thing about cancer to know is it's not a disease. It's like 300 diseases. Okay, and a lot of people get really mixed up with these kind of things in terms of what it means. Some of them are very treatable, some of them are not, some of them are life-changing, et cetera, right? So something to think about, and like I said, we're all going to be affected by it in some manner or another. About 1/4 of us will be dying from cancer, right? So if you're wondering how you're going to go, put your money on cancer. #1 cause of death in Canada, right? Of course, you're going to be dead to not get the money from the bet, but anyway, lots of numbers here. There's lots of good news though. The good news is the numbers are actually going down. This is the Canadian Cancer Society report, and it comes out every 2 years. So I've been downloading it for a while now and looking at it, and the numbers are getting better and better and more encouraging. More people are surviving from cancer. We're better at detecting cancer. There's more options for it, and those kind of things. The actual number of Canadians diagnosed with Canada does go up, but that's because our population is going up significantly. But like I said, the number of people dying from it, the number of people that are getting treated with it, all those things have been very encouraging with the numbers. So you're probably wondering, okay, you're going to die from cancer. Which one are you going to get? These are the most common types of cancers in Canada. Okay, and so #1 you can see is lung cancer. The good news is for that one, again, something very preventable, is most cases of lung cancer are linked to tobacco use. If you're a woman, you're more likely to have breast cancer. There are more men in Canada that smoke than women. So breast cancer is #1 in women. And the other numbers there, you can see colorectal and prostate cancer. Prostate cancer and colorectal cancer, they've sometimes changed places there for #3 and #4. And I think if you go to the States, prostate cancer might even be second in the States. And that's sort of a weird one because that's one we don't really understand a lot about the causes other than their family history. But a lot of these other ones, the thing that we can say about them and I'll show you actually my next slide here. If you look at what is known for the risk factors for these diseases, this is where it gets really, really interesting for cancers, is you can see that many of these risk factors have a lot to do with lifestyle or environment, things that we might be able to influence, right? So you can see, for example, lung cancer, we mentioned, highly linked to tobacco use, of course. Breast cancer, a variety of different things are linked to breast cancer: alcohol use, obesity, use of oral contraceptives, a family history. Again, breast cancer is kind of one of those things where it's hard to say what is breast cancer, because that's about 20 different diseases, right? All of which have kind of overlapping risk factors, right? And those kind of things. And those are just some of them. Colorectal cancer, you're looking at a diet, certain types of diet. We'll talk about that. Obesity, physical activity, smoking, and those kind of things. And bladder cancer, smoking, arsenic, workplace chemicals. So you can see, I put on this list here, right? Some major risk factors of cancer in general are many things that have to do with lifestyle. Now, you may not necessarily have a choice of all of these things, right? In terms of your exposure to some of these things. Smoking is a good example, right? My father was a smoker. I spent years of my life getting exposed to unwanted tobacco smoke, and something made me very unhappy for many years. And so you don't necessarily have a choice, but you can often affect these things a little bit. So it's worth to talk about, and you can notice diet is number 2 on that list. So let's talk about that a little bit. So one thing to say just before we get into this a bit more is that with some of these choices, diet being one, is you can think about foods as things that can either contribute or promote cancer, or they can kind of do the opposite. Some of them can lower your risk of certain types of cancers as well. Cabbage is one that I keep reading about, for example. Apparently, eating cabbage is good for getting rid of certain types of cancer. I don't know much about it. I just keep seeing it on lists everywhere and talking about how there's some science behind it. I haven't delved into that one at all, but I keep seeing something about cabbage, and people who don't eat much cabbage or cabbage-related foods. So cabbage-related foods includes things in the same family, so cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, and a few things like that, bok choy. So people apparently who don't eat much of those foods have a higher cancer risk. And I've read that several times. Again, I haven't really gone into all the details on that, but so like I said, you can think about foods as being things that promote or contribute to cancer, or the opposite, preventing it. And there's some examples there, right? And some of these things I'll get into a little bit more detail than others. Another one I keep reading about is people who have high salt diets that contributes to stomach cancer. And apparently certain Asian cuisines are into the high salt diets. So certain countries in Asia, if you were to do a map of stomach cancers, you just see Asia as like this big red blob, because there's a lot of countries there that do have high salt diets, for example. So let's talk a little bit about how cancer develops. Cancer develops basically due to some sort of genetic instability. So a mutation in a gene. And this can happen several ways. Sometimes it doesn't actually happen to you. As it's happened to someone before you, you inherit it, right? You inherit a cancer risk. And there's countless genes that are connected with higher cancer risks. The famous one is the one that people are getting screened for now for breast cancer. And that one, there's a very high correlation. I can't remember what the stat is, but certain people that have this particular allele, it's something like a 50% chance of getting breast cancer. And so very famously, the actress Angelina Jolie had her breast surgically removed because she had that gene for that reason, right? So you're hearing about that one a little bit because there is a very high connection. Many of them, many genes, it's kind of, it's not 50%, right? It's much, much lower. Cancer is more likely to happen with age, because as you age, you are making cells, and those cells are replicating their DNA, and there's just more likely a chance that eventually there's going to be some mistakes made by your cells, and more likely you'll have some mutations that might lead to cancer. The other thing when you age is your immune system gets degraded, and you know, something a lot of people don't realize is that your body on a regular basis fights off tumors. Usually they're very, very tiny. We're talking about like 20 cells, maybe 1,000 cells, and your body recognizes these abnormalities and goes in, your immune system cleans them up, and you have no idea. Sometimes they become little things like moles. People have moles on their skin, and we call those benign, or benign means friendly, but I know it's kind of a weird thing to call it, but it's not affecting your health at all, right? And then, you know, like I said, as you age, it's kind of a matter of time before something might escape the immune system or whatnot and lead into what we call cancer. The big category is, of course, environmental factors. And we can kind of think of it as sort of two categories: carcinogens, which are exposures to things. Usually people think about carcinogens as being chemicals, such as chemicals in tobacco smoke, or things like benzene. Don't drink benzene, please. But carcinogens also include things like ultraviolet radiation, X-rays, right? We don't want to be getting 1,000 X-rays a year. And also infectious organisms, right? The big one that most people probably know a little bit of something about is HPV. That's a human papillomavirus, and there's a vaccine for it now, which is one of the reasons why cancers are going down, because we have a vaccine that's preventing cervical cancer. So that's a good thing. And of course, we want to talk about dietary lifestyle, which, depending on who you ask, 20%, 25%. I keep seeing that 25 number, and I think it's because 25 is a nice round number. But the textbook says 20 to 50%, right? So what exactly it is, we probably have no idea. Again, this is complex epidemiological studies with multiple sources. And cancer studies, by the way, are really hard to do. You know, many cancers take like 20 years to develop or more. And so, you know, that's some hard to do those kind of experiments and whatnot. Never mind. You're probably not allowed to ethically expose people to known carcinogens, right? So we can't do those kind of things. You can do them in animals, but animals develop cancers much differently than humans, unfortunately, for the researchers. This is just talking a little bit about how cancer develops, right? You know, you have these normal cells, and they're regulated, and they grow at the right time when they should grow. And sometimes you get a mutation, or you have a carcinogen that affects a cell, and eventually it escapes the regulatory mechanisms and becomes what we would call a tumor. And if the tumor becomes invasive, then we start to call it a cancerous tumor, meaning invasive, meaning it's starting to cause either damage to nearby systems or cause some sort of disease symptoms of some sort, right? And there's a lot of terminology you could talk about these things, like metastasis is when a tumor will spread to other parts of the body, and that's often the death sentence for people, right? You have a cancer that's controlled in one part of the body, and then if it spreads in the blood, that's really bad, obviously. So what are we talking about here with lifestyle and cancer and those kind of things? A whole bunch of things there. I'm not going to go into detail on all of them. There's a few here I'm going to pick on and kind of talk about them. It is worth talking a little bit about tobacco use. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize about tobacco use is that it is linked not just to lung cancer, but actually multiple types of cancer. You can see I have a little star beside the lung cancer on there, because that is really the big one. But it is linked to all sorts of other cancers, including cancers of the throat and cancers of the kidney. You know, and it's really just like I said, you're putting toxins not just into your lungs, but those toxins are getting into the vascular system, which can end up in multiple body parts. So you can see it's talking about 5,000 different chemicals, and apparently about at least 70 are known carcinogens or precarcinogens. And you can see it's kind of talking a little bit here about how is it doing that. And you see that's the common mechanism with all cancer mechanisms, is that there's somehow the DNA ultimately is getting damaged, and that is leading to cells that are not growing properly, which can eventually become a tumor of some sort. I feel like there's something else I was going to say about tobacco use, but probably most people know that one anyway. We've known about this for a long, long time. So obesity is another big one that's worth talking about. Apparently several types of cancer linked to obesity. And this is one of these things that, in terms of what is going on, we don't fully know. We have some ideas. We think we know what's going on, maybe sort of. just trying to verify this is really hard to do. But you can see this is talking about different types of cancer. I put a star beside pancreatic cancer because I keep reading the link between obesity and pancreatic cancer, but all these other cancers are relevant. Why pancreatic cancer? Because remember, the pancreas is releasing enzymes for digestion and dealing with those kind of things. And so I don't know whether that has something to do with the pancreas is working overtime. I really have no idea. I just know that that's one of the links I keep reading about a bit more. But all of these to some form or another. It's maybe worth mentioning breast cancer as well. As I had mentioned in the previous slide, breast cancer has multiple possible causes or things that are all linked to it. And so some of the things, if you read on the previous slide, were alcohol use, use of oral contraceptives, and those kind of things. So breast cancer is linked very much to estrogen. That's why women are more likely to have breast cancer. Men can get breast cancer, it's just far less likely. Women obviously have more breast material and more estrogen. So those are two things counting against you. And estrogen is a fat-soluble hormone. So it turns out that if you have more body fat, that will contribute to estrogen, more estrogen. Exactly how that works, I don't know. And I think there's studies that show that women who had more body fat when they were going through puberty are more likely to have breast cancer. Women who had earlier puberty are more likely to have breast cancer, and those kind of things. So that's where the obesity thing comes in, right? In that a lot of cancers are hormone related. And when you have more hormones of certain types, estrogen being one of the key ones, it can lead to certain types of cancers. The other thing I'll say about breast cancer as well, I know this is not diet, but the oral contraceptives, birth control, a lot of them have estrogen or estrogen mimics in them. So by being on oral contraceptives, a woman is increasing the amount of estrogen in her body a little bit. Exactly how much, you know, if you look at the number of cases of breast cancer, it's not a huge amount, but the risk is just a tiny bit higher. And the risk is lower than it used to be. If you look at oral contraceptives, for example, in the 1970s or 80s, the amount of estrogen was much, much higher than what you'd find in current birth controls. But if you want some information on that, I have a good article I can send you on that a bit more. So here's another thing talking about, okay, I already talked about this, right? The hormones. What else is obesity doing? Obesity is also causing, in many cases, more inflammation in the body, in the joints and places like that. And inflammation, remember, we were talking about the white blood cells coming in and they're relatively aggressive. And sometimes when they're being relatively aggressive to look for things to scoop up, they can cause collateral damage, and that collateral damage can actually lead to DNA damage in your own cells. So that's another part of the cancer. Also, you know, there's lifestyle things you can connect this with this, right? You know, there's, for example, people who are obese may be eating other things that are linked to cancers, such as processed meats or more red meats in their diets and things like that. And those are also known carcinogens. So fun. We'll talk about meats here in a minute. We'll see if we'll talk about meats. We're almost out of time here. I also, if you're looking for a read on this, this is another good read on this. This was in the New York Times, I believe, was it? Time magazine. This was out a few years ago now, and was talking about cancer and millennials and why that might be the case, and because obesity is on the rise. But if you want to read kind of a decent article on this, it's worth a read on this particular topic. All right, let me see here. So by the way, I also saw this stat somewhere. I don't know what the science is behind it, but apparently even working out 1 to 2 times a week is enough to reduce your cancer rate. So that's good news, because, you know, if you're short on time, 1 to 2 times a week is a good one. And then cute little cartoon for you. Okay, what about fat and fatty acid intake? There's some animal studies, again, connecting certain fats with certain types of cancers. Exactly how these things apply to humans is kind of the question, right? In terms of what is going on there. We're not entirely sure, but it's worth it to mention that certain types of fats may promote certain types of cancers, and it's probably hormone related, but I'm not entirely sure about that. So let's talk about the meats, and that's where I'm going to finish off today. So high consumption of certain types of meats are linked to certain types of cancers, mostly cancers where the meats are going, right? So the bowel. And when I say bowel, I usually mean the intestines. Stomach, of course, is part of the bowels, but when we say bowel cancer, we usually mean intestine. So you can see this other note about high temperature cooking. So meat that is well done, particularly in men who smoke, seem to be at the higher risk. So men who smoke are eating well done red meat. Beware. That's the thing here. So let's talk about these processed meats and red meats. So both are worth to talk about. Both of these are classified as carcinogens. When you get into cancer, there's kind of groups of carcinogens. You can see the group number 1 means something is a known human carcinogen, meaning we have multiple good studies to link this particular thing with actual human cancers. So this is your processed meats. But this is linked to people who eat high amounts. We don't really know much about the moderate eater. Most of us probably have a hot dog from time to time, or some lunch meat or something like that. By processed meats, those are the kind of things we're talking about. So hot dogs, lunch meats, and bacon, right? Those are kind of the 3 things. By processed meats, often we're meaning meats that have nitrates in them. And that's part of the processing thing, right? And like I said, people who eat in higher amounts. So these are definitely linked to human cancers. We have lots of good data for this. The red meat, you can see is sort of classification of 2A. So classification 2A means we've got good studies in animals and kind of some data in humans, connecting high consumption of red meat with certain types of human cancers. So definitely these things are carcinogenic. To what degree should we cut them out completely? Probably not a big deal if you eat them in moderation. It's the high consumers that are the ones we're the most worried about. Found this cute little cartoon about the cancer sticks. Thought I'd show that to you. But so you can see this is talking about the risk of comparing tobacco and meat consumption, right? Because there was I'm just trying to remember where that was. It was probably in the news somewhere where somebody was comparing red meat to tobacco, and nothing can be compared to tobacco and cancer risk. Tobacco is like just massively much worse than almost any other cancer risk out there. But you can see they're giving you some numbers about this is cancers, and this is a UK infographic, but the number of cases in the UK. So yes, bacon is killing us. I know, it's making us sad, right? If you're looking for a really good article or podcast about this, check this one out. It talks a lot about bacon processing and the nitrates, and there's some things to say about that, right? Is that not all bacon has nitrates in it. Just most cheap bacon does. The thing is about bacon, the nitrates help you to cure it a lot faster. And there's sort of newer bacons that are said to be healthy because they're getting natural nitrates. Well, a chemical is a chemical, whether you get it from a natural source or a not natural source. A nitrate is a nitrate. So don't get fooled by that. I'm seeing that particularly with the lunch meats. I saw that advertised one place that it had natural nitrates to make these lunch meats and whatnot. But anyway, this is worth it to check out. This actually made me cut out lunch meats from my diet entirely. Not that it's calling them that bad. I just decided that was an easy fix in my diet. And so I've pretty much done it entirely for that reason. Bacon, it's so hard to cut out bacon. Right? Thanks, Wendy's. Right? I mean, totally, it's like, come on. I was doing so well, and then suddenly, these kind of things show up. But anyway, once in a while, indulgence, it's not too bad. Try not to have bacon every morning. So this is last thing I'll show you for today. Again, another infographic to show you, and it's talking about trying to cut down on what you can do and still get protein in your diet, still enjoy these things, but maybe not have quite as much, and also at the same time reduce your cancer risk dramatically. So you can see, for example, instead of having a ham sandwich, have a chicken or tuna sandwich, and those kind of things and whatnot. One last thing I'll say, if you're thinking of having a tuna sandwich, don't bring it to any of your classes. No one will like you. All right, that's it for today. We'll see you later.